Good morning. I'm George Willie. Welcome to The Other Side. Today we have Dr. Bandula Wijay, an eminent scientist and a diplomat. We're going to talk about his scientific world as well as some Sri Lankan politics. Welcome, Dr. Wijay.
Thank you, George.
Dr. Wijay, you obviously have spent a lot of your life in the scientific world. You have been credited for some major inventions in the medical field. So let's go over your career. Why don't we start with your degrees?
I'm basically a chemical engineer by birth, I suppose, and then have some degrees in mechanical engineering and polymer engineering.
So where did you get your bachelor's degree?
I got my bachelor's degree at Jadavpur University, Calcutta, India, under Indian Government Cultural Scholarship.
Yes.
After finishing that, I took an entrance test examination to IIT Kanpur, and I passed, and I got a scholarship to study.
So you're an IIT graduate?
I studied at IIT.
Yes, okay.
And then I didn't finish IIT career. I fell ill and other family obligations, went back to Sri Lanka.
Okay.
And I arrived in the US in 1974 as a Fulbright scholar to go studied at University of Southern California.
Okay.
Where I got my master's in chemical engineering, master's in mechanical engineering.
So you have two masters, one in chemical engineering, one is in mechanical engineering.
Right.
Okay.
And then PhD in polymer science and chemical engineering.
Now, then you finished your master's and then you went on to do your PhD.
That's right.
And what was your PhD in?
My PhD is basically in chemical engineering. I did my research on what is known as solid state physics, solid state physics, which is more on sort of very theoretical stress analysis type of things.
So tell us a little bit about your thesis. What did you discover?
I worked on three-dimensional fracture in what is known as the highly loaded systems, very typical of the fuel that is used in rockets. The rocket fuels are aluminum perchlorate and binder, which is mostly polyurethane. But this is very highly loaded, like 99% of that is the filler and a very small amount of binder. So the failure mode on these fuel systems is very different.
Okay.
So I did my thesis on something similar, where the filler is a special kind of carbon black, and the binder is rubber.
Okay.
So it's parallel to the system in rocket fuels.
So this is the fuel, or the rocket fuel.
Yes, except that you research on something very similar.
Okay. And
the fuel itself would be very dangerous to work on. And,
of course, yes. Now you said it was three-dimensional.
The failure mode in rocket fuels or the highly loaded system, as I found out through my research, is because of triaxial forces or three-dimensional forces. Yeah. This sort of thing has been very analytical, very esoteric type of research.
Okay.
Wasn't very much practical. Although I'm a very practical guy.
Right.
Yeah.
So did that research, was that government funded research? They were looking for something there? And when you said fracture, what does that mean?
Breaking apart, falling apart. You know. So under stress, the material fails. And material fails because it's highly loaded. I mean, there's very little. Imagine you go to the beach and you make a sandcastle, and sandcastle have very little binder, which is water.
Right.
So it fractures, it fails very easily.
So they were looking, you're studying that to see how you can avoid the fracturing, so that
Correct.
the fuel can be reliable, and when it's shot into the air, that it remains viable.
Yes, exactly. If you know the science behind it, if you know the theory behind it, then you can design a better system. This is also applicable in many things. For example, in oil drilling, there is a thing called blowout preventer. The blowout preventer is made out of similar systems. It's rubber, it's metal, it's carbon black. And so this fails under certain kinds of stresses.
I see.
And so having a good basic knowledge about how this works is very critical in being able to design the proper system.
And so you said it was it's a solid state, so meaning
Solid mechanics.
Okay.
I misspoke. I should add solid mechanics.
solid mechanics. Okay. So now with that, was there any was that did NASA or any of the agencies use that for anything?
I'm not aware of any.
Okay, you probably don't know, because they probably won't even
once
tell
I
you.
finished
Yeah.
my PhD, I moved
Okay.
on to medical field. So.
Okay. Okay. Now that you mentioned that, let's get to the medical field. So first of all, what got you there?
It was very essentially by accident. I was at a conference, and matter of fact, I presented a paper on my research, and I met some folks who worked on a medical device company, and they had some sort of a challenging problem.
Yes.
I told them I could solve the problem.
Yes.
And I went there for an interview, and everything else in the rearview mirror. So after that,
Okay. So it worked out well for you with the chemical engineering and the mechanical engineering background. To put that all together in a medical environment was probably a natural one.
well, basically, I'm a total believer of learning fundamentals in science. It is, at the end of the day, it's the fundamentals knowledge in science that helps you to solve problems. So when I went to work for this company, which is American Hospital Supply Corporation, the division Edwards Laboratories, is knowing some basic engineering principles to solve the problem, engineering and principles in science to solve this problem here.
So let's look at some of your significant inventions. All right, the balloon angioplasty catheter system, 1984. Tell us about that.
So this is the dawn of medical devices. I mean, this was the beginning of almost the beginning, maybe a few years earlier to the 1984. So I left Edwards Laboratories, where I received a very good training, and then came to Texas. In '84, I started on my own with the concept of these balloon devices. So we came up with this concept. Angioplasty was in its beginning. It's in
Obviously,
dawn.
at that time it was in infancy.
Yeah, in infancy, yes. And then what was important at the time was when you do angioplasty, the patient does not have oxygenated blood to the heart muscle, because the balloon is blocking it. So I came up with the concept of pumping blood beyond the balloon.
And how was that done?
So we developed a pump system. So we came up with the concept of what is known as active perfusion. So we have some intellectual property for that, along with intellectual property for the balloons, the angioplastic catheters that went along with it, so to keep the patient stable, electrocardiologically stable, patient is free of pain. So this system was developed.
So I can understand you inventing the mechanical side of it. You are an engineer, you're a mechanical engineer, a chemical engineer, and you can kind of understand all that. Now applying that to a living, breathing organisms, such as the human being, how did you acquire those skills? I mean, you must have worked with doctors and you must have worked with scientists who are, I guess, people that understood the biology of the human being. So how did that happen? How did you kind of combine those skills?
Exactly. So when you're developing devices, you have to work with the folks in the medical field, especially interventional cardiologists. When you go to the cath lab, the surgical environment where you would do angioplasty, you will see what their challenges are. So in the early days when the balloon is placed, you can see, oh, okay, the patient is in pain and the patient has the electrocardiologic changes that are not right, because the patient will end up with more complications. Yeah. So then you have a dialogue with the user, in this case interventional cardiologist. Is this a problem? How can I help to avoid it? So.
Now, Dr. Wijay, you have what, 28 patents?
About that.
About that. Okay, all right. So and then obviously we can go over all 28 of them, but I do want to go over some of your significant inventions, and then we'll move on to talking about Sri Lanka.
Sure.
And your diplomatic side of things.
Yes.
And I think take a quick break, and we'll be back and we'll pick up where we left. Thank you.
On The Other Side, we interview a variety of people and seek to examine their beliefs, their opinions, and their passions. Then we invite them to come with us to the other side and look at the antithesis of their views. What comes out is an in-depth conversation without the vitriol of the talk shows, but a cerebral engaging of ideas you will not find anywhere else. Come join us on alternate Saturdays at 8:30 a.m. on this channel. If you'd like to recommend a guest for The Other Side, contact us at the email address on the screen.
Welcome back. We are talking to Dr. Bandula Wijay, a scientist and a diplomat. We'll spend a little more time with his science and we'll move on to his diplomatic efforts. Dr. Wijay, we were talking about some of your inventions, and off the camera we were discussing, and you said the stent would be a significant invention that you made, which is widely used around the world now. Let's talk about that. How did you come about inventing it, and what has been the extent of its use and also the extent of its value?
Yes, George. In mid-90s, the balloon angioplasty was widely used worldwide. However, there were issues or problems with it, mainly restenosis or reclosure of the artery that was opened by a balloon, about 30% of the time. That's a very significant number.
So it failed?
I wouldn't say it failed.
Or it collapsed?
The 30% of the time, there was a reclosure, approximately 30% of the time. So it needed a new solution. And the new solution was already there, the concept of stent. So at the time, I wouldn't say the concept of stent was new, but people picked it up and start coming up with devices. These are scaffolding devices, a device that scaffolds and holds the artery open. So there were a few devices developed and were in the market, but there were some shortcomings in these devices. Matter of fact, one of the shortcomings was they were short and they were not flexible to enter into tortuous arteries. So at this time, in mid-90s, I patented several stent concepts. And one of the stent concepts that I patented is called the nested loop concept.
Okay.
This particular term may not be familiar to people who are not in the business.
Yes.
But this nested loop concept gave birth to a new stent that was more flexible and also had good radial strength when it was placed.
So the 30% of the, let's call it the collapse of the angioplast, was corrected by the stent?
Yes, it is, but it also left a small percentage still that would re-stenose after. But you know, it was brought down to a much smaller number, 2 or 3% range.
So with the what do you call the nested loop stent, the use of stent then became safe, it had longevity. It has
actually, the stent then became mainstream.
Okay.
So at this time, there were other inventors, probably 3 or 4 other inventors or inventor groups that came with similar type of concepts with flexibility and radial strength. However, geometrically, there are certain differences between the various different inventions.
Okay.
So, however, the invention that I made was eventually sold, and the product is being manufactured and sold now is fairly competitive in the market.
So clearly, this is a major breakthrough in medical science, in how people were treated. Now I know you moved on from stents to the heart to stents in other places of the body.
Yes, I have. Yes,
yeah. And you're still working on some of those.
Correct.
Yes.
The stent concept itself is a big invention.
Yes.
Overall, whether it is my own or somebody else's,
right.
It made a huge contribution to the treatment of heart disease.
You know,
yes.
Allowing blood to flow, I guess, would be the thing. Dr. Wijay, you also had a partner in some of these things, and who is that, and what was his contribution?
One of the most amazing things that happened in my career was I thought about the concept of perfusion angioplasty, or pump, using a pump to pump blood, and I applied for a patent. And when I met Dr. Paolo Angelini, who at the Texas Heart Institute,
yes.
And when I explained to him what I wanted to do, he had a article he was going to publish about something he has done similar using a hand pump. Mine was a mechanical pump.
Yes.
He had a hand syringe doing pretty much the same thing, and we were basically elated of this meeting,
right.
and we became partners for about 12, 13 years, where we developed a company and sold the various products. So that has been a very interesting
relationship
and turn in my medical device career.
I was fortunate to have met him also. You introduced me to him. Well, okay. Well, I noticed that in 1982, you had also invented a use of copolymer of nylon P-backs for catheter tips.
Yes, this I invented. This was a very interesting concept. The catheters in the early 80s were very big. They were in the size of a pencil in diameter. And because these catheters had to pump contrast media at very high pressure, so they were large and they were thick, they were bulky. And they entered through the groin, so it made a big hole in the groin or in your arm. So I came up with this concept, so-called the French Revolution.
And I made a specific reference to 1982 because that's the year we met.
Is that right?
Yes. All right. Dr. Wijay, you are the Honorary Consul General of Sri Lanka. You were appointed about 4 years ago. Yes. So let's talk about Sri Lanka. I think it's an interesting topic. So, Dr. Wijay, now as an honorary consul, what are your duties?
I have a lot of things I do as honorary consul. I take care of the community. There are passport, visa issues, passport and visa issues for other travelers who go to Sri Lanka.
And your jurisdiction is the entire state of Texas?
Only Texas,
okay.
Yes. So
well, that's big enough.
It is large, yes. And also people in the surrounding states do call me, and I help them out with the passport and visa issues. And here locally, I am quite involved in various cultural issues when the other communities would like us to participate in various cultural events, which we do. At the same time, my wife and I participate in their cultural issues. and I am constantly in communication with other consuls.
So Dr. Wijay, I think we have a map of Sri Lanka on the screen right now. Obviously the big issue in Sri Lanka has been for many years now the conflict, the Tamil Sinhalese conflict. Thankfully, it was ended in 2009. There was a military victory for the Sri Lankan government against the Tamil Tigers, and the country is beginning to stabilize now, I would imagine. And,
that's right.
There have been several elections in the meantime, and people have come and gone, and there's a current government in place. So first, let's talk about what is the current government doing with regard to the reconciliation efforts between the majority Sinhalese and the minority Tamils?
I think it was very obvious during the last election when President Sri Lanka came and asked all the politicians not to have election meetings and election speeches that will hurt the reconciliation process. So that was a very good sign.
Yes.
So he asked all the politicians from both parties, both Tamil and Sinhala parties. So I think that's a good direction, good gesture on part of the president.
And obviously with the new election now, the opposition leader is a Tamil. Sambandhan is the opposition leader. How do you think that balance is going to work out? I don't think there had been a Tamil opposition leader in the Sri Lankan government, Sri Lankan parliament for years.
Yes, I think about 20-some years ago there was an opposition leader who is Tamil, but this now opposition leader is a Tamil, and I think that's a positive turn because now the Tamils in a lawful way can bring up their grievances in the parliament and say, this is what we want, this is what we I feel that we have been neglected, or there are grievances to the government. So I think that opens up a road, an avenue, and I think that is a good thing.
So are there been any efforts in recognizing language, religion, in any of that type of moves under the new government? Have there been any constitutional amendments that have been proposed?
Yes, the one, obviously the one that is most contested is the 13th Amendment, which means that Sri Lanka must have, according to the 13th Amendment, provincial councils, and that has been established, and the elections has been held. Ministers have been elected. There's a chief minister, and all the different provinces in Sri Lanka right now. Tamil is an official language in the areas where people speak Tamil. There are a few issues that need to be resolved.
But I think the spirit is there now to resolve this.
I think the spirit is there.
Yes.
I think the spirit is there. The spirit is we have to understand we are humans.
Yes.
And we only have one race, human race, not Tamil, not Sinhalese.
So Dr. Wijay, tell us from this map the sort of the composition of Sri Lanka. Now, the north, where the northern province, and then there is Trincomalee, and then there's Batticaloa, right? So north and the east, that's traditionally Tamil areas, right?
The northern province is traditionally Tamil. The Batticaloa area is also Tamil, but Trincomalee area is both Tamil and Muslim.
Muslim, okay.
Muslim. What is interesting, though, is majority of the Tamils live outside of these provinces.
Okay.
In the western province.
Okay, and even in the south.
Mainly in the western province, and some in south, and also some in the central province.
And in the Sinhalese population is mostly in the south and the central province of Sri Lanka.
Unfortunately, because of the war, the Sinhalese population in northern province dwindled. There is some Sinhalese population in Trincomalee area, and there is some in the Batticaloa area.
But now, historically, the great civilizations in Sri Lanka, you know, the great kings of Sri Lanka, ruled from the Anuradhapura area and in the Polonnaruwa area, because I remember the ruins there. I mean, just enormously, just beautiful architecture that were developed during their time. So, tell me a little bit about the Anuradhapura history.
The ancient kings were in Anuradhapura, Polonnaruwa, the central area of Kandy, and also some in the southern province as well.
Now, you're from the south.
I'm from the south.
Which part?
From Gaul.
Okay,
Yeah.
right here.
Right there.
Okay, all right.
Yeah, so most of the time the kings were in all these areas, and we also had some Kerala or Indian kings.
Yes,
as well.
yes, of course.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so
Now, in the north, of course, you know, there were the kings from the southern part of India, the Pandyan king, the Chola king, the Sera kings. They were all, you know, in those areas, and it's been an interesting history for these two groups to have lived in this little island. It's not a little island, of course. So, on the economic side, how are things going in Sri Lanka right now?
after the war ended in 2009, the Sri Lankan economy grew rapidly. I think on the average about 8 to 9% a year GDP. So that I think will continue. There is quite a bit of investment from various countries, both Asia and Europe. So that development is continuing. Roads are being built, and harbors, airports, and islands are being built. So therefore, there is a tremendous economic growth. Unemployment is extremely low. I think it's less than 2%. So
you know, Sri Lanka was one time, you know, headed towards becoming the next Singapore. You think we still have the chance?
I think so.
It's surrounded by the ocean. We have great ports.
Yes. I think Sri Lanka can be the next Singapore or better. We just have to resolve some of the issues that in the country, improve the education system, the healthcare system, and just the living standard. And I think we are now it's a middle-level economy in the world. It's considered as
I see. So we're no longer third world country.
It's no longer a third world country. That's right.
By saying we, I'm betraying the fact that I'm a Sri Lankan as well. So, but Dr. Wijay, thank you so much. This has been an enlightening discussion, both from your scientific inventions, your scientific background, and of course on the Sri Lankan situation. Thank you for coming. Thank you for taking the time to talk to us. And,
thank you for having me, George.
Absolutely. And we will see you all next time on the other side.